Welcome to FileMaker Security in the Modern Ecosystem. This is going to be a session covering how security and devices and networks and just in general, everything outside of FileMaker affects us as FileMaker developers for hosting, distributing, and accessing our apps. My name is Mike Burgee. That's pronounced Burgee. It's cold down here because they have the AC cranked up too high. I work for a platinum level partner called Mainspring Incorporated. Some of you may remember that as Anvil DataWorks. Same company, same people. At Mainspring, I do FileMaker development. I also do heavy web development, internal and external mentoring for FileMaker training, and I do prototyping for investing in new technologies for Mainspring to see what service offerings we should explore and come up with. I'm certified in versions 11 through 17 of FileMaker. I've been doing FileMaker for about 10 years. Before that, I did IT work, web development work. I've been doing PHP work for the better part of 25 years now. But FileMaker has really taken my development career to the next level. A lot of you recognize me by name from helping you out on the community. I'm always happy to help, and I'm so rewarded by people coming up to me at DevCon and saying that I've helped them out on the forums or Facebook. So I'm happy to be a community contributor and part of the MVP program. And of course, that since I've been working from home for 5 years now, I'm somewhat of a home office escapee. If I can tell you one thing about working from home for that long, it's that you get a lot of hobbies to get yourself out of your house very fast. So my hobbies include things like being a member at the world's largest makerspace. So all that cool IoT stuff that you saw was stuff I was already working with 4 years ago with guys and soldering guns and breadboards, hanging around a table, drinking beer. So it's a good time. I also keep saltwater aquariums and grow coral to help propagate coral into the saltwater hobby so that coral is not harvested from our oceans. And I do woodworking and mountain biking and skiing and so much more that I can't even, I could take up the whole hour. But of course, you're here to learn about security. This session is 95% about education. If there's anything I hope that you gain out of this session, it's education and confidence for analyzing your own security in your own deployments and really coming up with a security plan for how to deal with common threats that are coming into FileMaker by inheritance. And what I mean is FileMaker inherits that security risk from outside of itself, something from the network or people external trying to gain access. Of course, that leads to prudence, which is the thought that you should care about security. And obviously you do because you're here, sitting here after lunch. Hopefully you didn't just duck in here to find a good place to go to sleep, take a nap. But being prudent and thinking in the zero trust approach of how can I check for security at every level of my deployment. That's prudence. So after you've made that plan, training, of course, I'm here training you, hopefully. Hopefully you're learning from me. And also you can disseminate that knowledge to the community as a whole, but also to your staff, your employees, your non-FileMaker technical contacts. If you've ever struggled with an IT department that says we don't use FileMaker because it's not secure, I hope you gain from this session that FileMaker can be very secure compared to the world ecosystem as a whole. And again, this session is all about community. There's a very strong security track here at DevCon this year. It's all in this room, so you could stay in here all day and learn a great deal about security, led by very good presenters. We're supported by two very good community contributors as well, one of which is sitting up here, Mr. Stephen Blackwell, and also Kirk Rhinelander, who has been passing me non-FileMaker security dossiers for the last 6 months, ever since he found out I was hosting this session. So I've read a lot of things, a lot of charts, a lot of numbers that I'm kind of like falling asleep over, but I'm doing it so that I can share that knowledge with you guys. So let's talk about modern security. So modern security revolves around these 4 points. You have your points of security failure. That's going to be things like, they didn't give us a screen this year, so I don't have speaker notes, so I need to go back to my paper, sorry. Things like your servers, your clients, and your network. That's the point at which things fail. Your server gets taken down, so now your server's not available. One of your clients gets infected with malware, and now that client is having issues. So those are the points of where security fails. It's important to think about that because that's the same place where you go to troubleshoot when something has gone wrong. But it's also the place where you can go and be proactive about security. The zones of vulnerability revolve around those points of failure. So those zones are going to be things like networks. Networks are vulnerable to large-scale DDoS attacks where somebody is flooding your network with a bunch of machines trying to get that zone, that network to go down. Because if that zone goes down, then they're not just taking out one machine, they're taking out an entire network of machines, causing chaos. Other zones include things like a local hack, like a virus that's distributed around your local network from one infected machine. And things as well like man-in-the-middle attacks where your network traffic is being intercepted and sniffed. The vectors of attack that people use, these are the methods that people will use to hack you. And these are normally coming from places like single hackers. It's one guy at home trying to gain access to your computer to expose a flaw. Sometimes a vector of attack is what's called a charity hack. It's somebody who's trying to expose security vulnerabilities in your network for the purposes of either exposing that privately to you and informing you of that, or collecting a bounty if one's available. Hacker cells, on the other hand, can be government-funded or super-funded private groups of people that are attacking your network. These can be a lot more effective because it's a team of people working together against you in security. Botnets work on the same principle as hacker cells, but unlike hacker cells, botnets are scalable up to many, many devices, hundreds of thousands of devices. As a matter of fact, the largest botnet attack has to do with the same thing they were touting, in our community, Internet of Things. There was a compromise of about 15 million Internet of Things devices that turned into one of the largest botnets on Earth, and then suddenly started attacking and jamming up traffic. It actually took down, it took down a large portion of the internet network because it started flooding the internet as a whole with traffic all at one time. So that kind of chaos can be on a massive scale thanks to a botnet. And of course, another vector of attack that's a lot more common, and a lot of people say this will never happen to me until it happens, is the social engineering attack. That's where you accidentally email your password to somebody and you got one letter wrong in the email address, or somebody walks in the door, looks at your computer screen and writes down the password that you have out on a Post-it note on your computer screen. That's social engineering attacks. Those are the attacks that are on us as people. It's our human fault for that. So what's the gain out of attacking? What's the malicious goal of this? One of the security quotes, or one of the security reports that I read from Cisco said that in 2017, there was $60 billion of lost revenue just from computer downtime from hacking. That's just from downtime. That's not lost cost of data. That's not credit card fraudulent transactions. That's just productive downtime from people not being able to work because their computer is not functioning. $60 billion. So that malicious goal can just be chaos. It can be targeted chaos, but there can be people that just do it because they want to. They want to interrupt, operations overseas in a geographically specific country. But, hackers with clear goals can be a lot more dangerous. People that actually want to get your data and use it for malicious purposes, those are the dangerous ones. Most of those people are going to do what's called a ransom attack. And a ransom attack is where somebody breaks into your computer, your network, is able to either extract files and take them out of your network, or encrypt files on your network and leave them there, and then demand a ransom for you to be able to recover those files. And if you haven't thought about security, and part of security is that backup plan of having those files available in a worst case scenario, your CEO could say, pay out the ransom, let's see what we can do. So planning for security is very important because all of these modern things have nothing to do with FileMaker as a product. But FileMaker inherits all of these security risks by being connected to that outside world. So a quick vocabulary lesson. I'm going to try to run through all these really fast. We'll touch on a few, but I want to make sure that you all know these terms in here. And again, this is the same as the last slide. All of this stuff here has nothing to do with FileMaker as a product. It has everything to do with FileMaker as part of the modern ecosystem. Let's start with DDoS. I already briefly explained that. Distributed denial of service. This is where somebody or a group of somebodies will try to flood your network to prevent other people from accessing that. Later on, as part of our demonstration, I'm going to ask all of you to help me simulate a DDoS attack, and we'll see if it works. Injection is the idea of taking a string of malicious code, saying something like, delete all the tables in the database. That's a SQL command, right? But you say, well, FileMaker doesn't let you do that because it's just going to store that as record data. But you're wrong, because FileMaker has a plugin engine. There are plugins available for you to execute native SQL commands. And that is why FileMaker is susceptible to injection attacks. So what happens in an injection attack is that that string of malicious code is evaluated as part of that database call, that SQL-like statement call. And the database server says, okay, drop tables, I understand how to do that, and it performs that. Man in the middle is somebody sitting between you and your server that is intercepting unencrypted or encrypted network traffic. So that's why it's important to have things like SSL certificates, where your network traffic between your clients and your server is going to be encrypted. And even if you have somebody sitting there as a man in the middle, they're not going to be able to get that information. So this is actually really dangerous if you're doing something like submitting credit card information online. That's why you're always looking at your address bar to see if that HTTPS is there, and you have a little lock with an SSL certificate. It's because you don't want to type in your credit card and send it to that vendor and have it stolen en route. Encryption is the act of obfuscating information. It's scrambling that data so that if somebody gets it, it can't be read. There is very weak encryption. There is very strong encryption. FileMaker is using AES-256 encryption. That is very strong encryption. There's a FileMaker function for base64 encoding. That's a very weak encryption because you can just take that, pop it in a website, and decrypt it without any sort of protection at all. There's actually a very great session right after mine called Introduction to Cryptography by Chris. So if you have an open slot in your schedule after mine, his session's really cool, and it's going to do a deep dive into explaining encryption. Spoofing is just the act of pretending to be somebody you're not to try to gain access to a system. Whether or not you're impersonating somebody's computer or impersonating somebody's identity, the goal there is to just try to gain access pretending you're somebody else so you can do that action that they do in their daily life. So in FileMaker, that could be somebody that's trying to say, well, I need to make a layout change. So if you grant them full access so they can make the layout change, you've granted them full access to everything else as well. So that could be a form of spoofing. Social engineering we already covered. Phishing is the act of trying to fish for information. So it could be somebody that's pretending they're your IT administrator and they say, send me your username and password. I need to test your account, see if it works. And people will respond with their username and password. And that's also coupled closely with social engineering. APT is a advanced persistent threat. And what that is a threat that sits and camps out on your network and gathers information over a long period of time. So if a hacker gains access to your local area network and sits there and monitors your traffic for 30 days, intercepting emails or other traffic that's flying around your network, files that are getting passed back and forth, their goal is to remain undetected and intercept that information. So, ransomware we covered. A logic bomb is something that is very possible in FileMaker, and one of the things that I've actually heard of happening in FileMaker before. So what a logic bomb is it's a conditionally executed chunk of malicious code. And what that means is that if somebody, you have this guy and he's developing on your file, but he's kind of already checked out because he knows he's going to be fired in a week. So he puts in this hidden chunk of code that executes that says, if the date is after 1/1/2019, go to this place and delete all the data. And if nobody finds that in your code, somebody's going to log on the first day of 2019, and that code will execute and go delete that table. And nobody will know what happened until they trace it down. Now, hopefully, again, your backup plan covers that, but if it doesn't, you could be in a bad place. Brute force is just a big guy standing in front of your front door, constantly knocking, trying to get you to open it up. Brute force uses what's called a rainbow table, which is a list of all possible password combinations. And it will sit there and try those combinations until something stops it from doing that. So we'll go over a FileMaker feature later that can prevent the brute force attack. A federated ID, which is another term you've probably heard this week, is a single source of truth for your identity. It's the same as my passport or my driver's license. It's that one piece of information that I can use anywhere to identify myself and authenticate myself. Overflow is an attack that involves trying to overflow the resources of a server. This is another attack that I have actually demonstrated before and seen in the wild of FileMaker. Most of you have probably done this attack on your server by accident without even realizing it. So if you have a script and you say perform script on server, and it's just loop, new record, and loop, that is an overflow attack, because it's either going to overflow your memory, trying to create all those records endlessly, or it's going to overflow your hard disk with drive space, or it's going to overflow your processor. And any one of those is an overflow attack. So there's buffer overflow and stack overflow and heap overflow. You can read into all those separately, but the idea is that you try to crash the hardware on purpose. Zero trust is the top to bottom not trusting anything. So the point of zero trust is to validate identity before you give access to anything at any level, from the server to the client. Signatures are like your driver's license, well, not like your driver's license, sorry. That was a bad analogy. I'm thinking this stuff up off the fly. What can I say? A signature is going to be something like an SSL certificate, where it's a piece of documentation that is trying to establish trust with somebody. So when you go to a form to check out, and put your credit card information in to check out. The signature is what's under that lock. It's the lock that tells you, here's the certificate for this site, here's when it expires, here's who it's issued by. That's a signature. Insecurity through obscurity is a catchphrase that I'm sure you've heard if you've ever gone to a security session before at DevCon. It's surprisingly effective on the rest of the ecosystem as well, not just FileMaker. In FileMaker, you suffer from the, well, nobody knows what my server address is, so I'm fine hosting this admin no password file. That's insecurity through obscurity. But in the rest of the world too, it's the same type of thing. Like, oh, I'm never going to get a brute force attack, so I don't need to enforce really strict password policy. And then, of course, they get brute force attacked, and then all of a sudden it's a big deal. So the idea of insecurity through obscurity is just, you need to care about security, right? You're not obscure. FileMaker is not obscure. FileMaker, an Apple subsidiary, is not obscure. Our workplace innovation platform is not obscure. So it's great that you're here. I'm sorry, I see eyes glazing over already. We're almost done with the vocabulary, and then we can get on to more fun stuff. GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation. Are any EU guys over here? Raise your hand. Oh wow, lots of you. So you can probably skip Klaus's session because you already dealt with it. But if you're not enforcing GDPR, go to Klaus's session. That's also this afternoon. But basically, this is a set of standards, regulations that the EU introduced about how companies are responsible for protecting your identity. And it's really about your identity, right? Because you're loaning yourself, your identity, to that company to perform an action, whether that action is to deliver a product through an online order or provide you with email service if you're Gmail. You're providing your identity to that provider. So the GDPR is a set of rules around that, how they can use that data, and what rights they need to provide to you as a user if you want to take your data back from that loan. IoT we already covered. Identity we've covered. Everybody good for identity? And MFA is multi-factor authentication, which is any authentication where you're going through more than one gate. So if you enter in a password, and then it sends you a text message with the code, and then you put in that code, that's two-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is 2+. So it can go 2 for as many steps as you want to make it. Thanks for hanging out for the vocabulary lesson, guys. All right, so how do you take these security concepts, this vocabulary, this knowledge, this ecosystem, and then apply it to FileMaker security? Well, it starts with a top-down approach. And what I mean from the top down is you start by at the top where the data comes from. And for those of you that were in my server master class, you understand this top-down approach already. Start at the server, then you go down to the application, which is FileMaker server, probably. Then you go down, well, so server hardware, server operating system, then FileMaker, then the network on the other side, on the client side, then the client, FileMaker application, then the client OS, then the client computer. So you're working in that top-down approach for providing security. And with Zero Trust, you want to establish, security at each one of those steps. Each one of those steps is one of those vectors of vulnerability or zones of vulnerability where you could be attacked anywhere in that chain. So a lot of that I named off in that chain isn't FileMaker related. Just the application part of that is FileMaker related, the application on the server and the client. But you have server hardware you need to secure, server networking that you need to secure, the network connection that the client has that you need to secure, that client's computer. So there's security everywhere as part of this process. So the plan that you need to do is a closed door approach. So how can I close as many of those doors as possible between my server application and any other client? And how can I just open the door when I know that it's the right person on the other side? Don't go solo with this plan. FileMaker developers are great, they're fierce, but they also have a lot of bravado that gets them into trouble, myself included. So don't go solo. Talk to your IT department if you have one. If you are the IT department, talk to somebody else that is also an IT department. You know what? If you write down your plan, this is what network security I'm going to have. This is how my FileMaker database is going to authenticate users. You know, the session previous to this, watch the recording, Sarah Stickford's session on making a security plan. That's a whole session, an hour session on making that plan. When you have that plan, talk to other people about that plan, other trusted contacts. Talk to Stephen Blackwell, he'll be happy to help you. Talk to me, I'll be happy to help you too. Post it in the community will be happy to help you. Because, you know, any failure story is a failure on all of us. It really is. So the last thing I want to add to your planning is testing. Testing is something that we just don't do a lot of in FileMaker. And I really didn't click with how little we do testing for our FileMaker security until I switched over to doing web development on Laravel. And on Laravel, I use a package where you're able to write your own security tests. And it's just very simple. Go to this page, log in with these credentials, see what result you get on the other end and compare it to this. And it's either pass or fail. And now that I have written that test, every time I deploy code for my program, it runs that test, and it tells me if it ever fails. So if I spend a little bit of time after each update that I make writing that test and testing that, by the end of the time when I'm done developing, I now have hundreds of security tests or hundreds of functionality tests that are being written that are run automatically each time. Now, there's actually a session that's going on right now, hopefully you're not going to get up and leave, about testing your FileMaker apps from Lance at Geist Interactive, and watch the recording for that. Make that plan for how you're going to test security in your application. So, I don't think I'm going to go lightning round on all of these. I'm going to pick and choose, because we're already halfway through and I still have demos to get to with you guys. But these are the primary 18 security features that I came up with that the FileMaker platform does. So take a picture of this slide, or I'll upload these as my session materials later on, because the ones online are out of date. But show this to your IT guy the next time he tells you FileMaker is not secure. Show him, this is all the security protocols or features that we can implement on the file platform today. And know that every year, you know, on the yearly release cycle now with FileMaker, they're going to continue to add and improve these security features. So like a recent addition to password policy was account lockout. Now you can set that a user locks out. That prevents a brute force attack, because after a certain number of attempts, that person is no longer going to be able to try. FM server sample can be used for testing security. It's the most open file you will ever host on your server, and it's hosted by default. So you can use that to your advantage to test things. Granular privileges. This is something where if you've ever coded like a web development platform like PHP or JavaScript, and you're writing your own database calls, granular privileges is something FileMaker has blessed us with as a community. And it's been in FileMaker forever now, right? The ability to specify on a per record basis if that user should have access to edit that record or even view that record. You can also do that kind of security locking by design in FileMaker, right? You can read what access privilege set a user has and redirect them to a specific layout that has only the fields that they should view. And you have an admin redirected to a separate layout that has more fields or all fields. This prevents the accidental viewing of data, the accidental exposure of data. Secure containers and file encryption at rest. Those are more recent additions to the FileMaker platform that are very important because they prevent those files from being stolen when they're on the disk. VREV locking, oh, that's a good one. So let's say that you have some users that are maybe still on FileMaker 14 and they're accessing your 16 server. What all security features have changed in version 15 and 16? There's a lot of stuff, right? But those 14 users, they're not going to have that. So FileMaker has built in a very small setting under file options, but a very important setting that says, I only want people with this version and higher to connect. So if I'm making a new file for somebody in 17, and I know they're going to have 17, I can set that only 17 people should have that access. I can control that access. That's version revision locking. That's actually something that's really unique to FileMaker that's not common in the rest of the ecosystem. And then some of you are probably confused by outbound email. Well, both the integrated email step, but also in the admin console, you can specify TLS encryption for your outbound emails. So you can secure outbound emails. OAuth and Active Directory integration to allow FileMaker to access those federated IDs. Port binding so that you can control traffic coming in and out of your server. FileMaker only uses these specific ports by default, so you can control the security on those ports. That'll actually also be part of our demo here in a minute. Scripts, you can script with a number of get functions to say, if it's this user, kick them out of the script because they don't belong here. Allow user abort off, that type of thing. Things that are designed to make your system secure and function so that nobody can accidentally gain access to that. Has everybody had a chance to take the screenshot? Is there any questions on this? Anything up here that's not familiar to you that you want me to explain? Great. Either you're all asleep or you're already getting it, which is good. And since you're laughing, I'm thinking you're awake. All right. There's a couple more slides, and then we'll be on to a quick demo. So what makes FileMaker more secure? This is the other stuff that after you've shown that last slide, you can kind of rub it into your IT manager's face. We have a very involved community. Like I said, we're all fierce developers, right? So we will defend our platform, and we will aggressively try to secure our platform from any type of attack. We have the platform tools that I showed on the last slide. The proprietary format is another feature of FileMaker that makes it secure. It's very hard to reverse engineer an FMP12 file. Very few people have tried, and even less have succeeded. We do have flexibility, though. We do have security, but we also have flexibility to deploy our apps anywhere. And we have the ability to secure those apps at every level on iOS devices, on the web, and through just regular desktop and Windows. And then security reporting is what makes FileMaker secure. So you have things like logging, where you can log all of the access that comes in to your server. But also security reporting is a two-way street. So there's a community area called Report a Product Issue. If you find a security flaw in FileMaker, report the product issue. You will get feedback from FileMaker in those forums. They will actively investigate issues that are posted there and post their findings. I've seen a lot of threads for other bugs, not security bugs, but other bugs where, somebody discovers it and there's a banter back and forth with a FileMaker representative where the FileMaker representative gets their file, gets a copy of their file, tests it out for themselves. And that results in more security as a whole for our community. because they're going to take that lesson and they're going to roll it into an update. If it's a bug, they're going to issue a patch. If it's a new feature that's needed, there's also the product IDs section, and that's what drives our roadmap. And of course, we have to talk about what makes FileMaker less secure as well. We've already discussed security through obscurity, but I want to promote it again because it is a real problem. One of the common security flaws, and I blogged about this on the Mainspring blog earlier this year, is that in early versions of WebDirect, if you didn't add your own custom robots.txt file, which is a file that says, ignore my server, I'm not doing anything, Google's web crawler is going to happily come along and index your WebDirect address. And that's going to expose your WebDirect server if you're using a DNS entry to the outside world. So if you do a Google search for a specific search string, you can find other people's WebDirect servers out there. And that's a security flaw that was through obscurity. I suffered from it as well. That's where I made my mistake. I thought WebDirect was secure, but that's insecurity. I now know better, and I came up with a way to patch that and add my robots.txt file so that my 13 and 14 servers would be secure from that. In 15, somebody else reported that to FileMaker, and now FileMaker adds that by default. So newer versions of FileMaker server don't suffer from that. Unchanged defaults kill us, right? The FM server sample file, it's great. I installed FileMaker server, I'm ready to go, and I'm going to go to lunch. So I leave that FM server sample there. But if you have a security testing team, maybe you come back from lunch and your server is offline, and you don't know why. The admin with no password in a file. That's an unchanged default that can get you. Not having SSL is an unchanged default. You can install FileMaker server. It nags you a little bit now. In 17, there's a new feature that will say you must accept this risk to not proceed with an SSL certificate. But that unchanged default can get you. The level of effort that people put in can sometimes make FileMaker less secure as well. It takes time to learn how to do things like SSL. It takes time to learn how to develop your FileMaker apps in a secure fashion. So at some point in time, somebody's going to say, well, the finance department really needs this report. So you're just going to dump the entire invoices table into that report without thinking about the security of it. And that's really what that lack of effort is. The lack of education is what we're trying to solve today, right? We're trying to make sure that everybody knows how to secure FileMaker or knows how to deal with FileMaker security or where to go to find those resources. And plugins, like I mentioned before, plugins aren't necessarily insecure by themselves. You can install a plugin, and if you don't use it, it's not necessarily insecure because it's there. But it does allow for insecurity through the features that plugin delivers. And again, the example of that was SQL injection through, I know both Base Elements and Monkey Bread have SQL functions that you can call that are vulnerable to that. So I think this is I'll skip. Yep. Last slide before the demo, and this is just a mention slide. There's a session, like I said, later on today, Klaus's session on GDPR. It's definitely worth mentioning. Why? Because it's a very thorough set of standards for how you can develop your applications to deal with data security, especially when you're dealing with consumer data, people's identities. So if you have a contacts database, which I'm sure every one of us does, what rules are involved in that if somebody contacts you and says, I want my data removed? The implications are far-reaching. It's not just the EU that has to deal with GDPR. If you're a European country, or if you're a European company and you have a server that happens to be in New York at your New York office, but you're storing data from the EU on there, you're susceptible to the EU's rules. So even though that server may not be in the EU, because your company is doing business there, you might be susceptible to those rules. Yeah, so financial risk associated with GDPR, and Klaus will go into this more, but I believe the minimum penalty is €500,000, which roughly translates to, I think, $790,000, something like that. And they made it absurd so that people would comply. Now, nobody has been flagged under GDPR yet, but that I know of. I'm going to add that addendum. And definitely, if Klaus's session is a good one, if you're going to something else, make sure you catch the recording later. But yeah, for further reading, go to Klaus's session on GDPR. But the idea of the penalty being there is something that most people don't deal with as a reason for securing their data. So, you know, you can enact regulation, but how do you say, like, how do you encourage people to actually do it? So the €500,000 penalty is a way to do that. You know, the idea that you could go out of business completely based on that. All right, well, that's the talking portion, and we have 18 minutes, so I think I have enough time to get through the demo portion. I'm gonna take a seat, have a drink of water, and let's talk about some AWS stuff. Oh good, it's on mirroring. In my training day, I started talking for about 3 minutes before I realized I wasn't showing the screen, so good to have that here. I'll try to zoom in on what's important, but if somebody like in the middle of the back could just let me know if you want me to zoom in on anything else, we'll go there. So I'm gonna start off by going to the AWS console. I still have my account set up from when I was doing the training day, so I'm going to log in. And I'm going to go to the EC2 cloud, which is where my FileMaker cloud instance is running right now. So this is a FileMaker cloud instance that I set up in our training class. It's up and running right now. But I'm going to talk about security groups first. So security group is what establishes somewhat of a virtual firewall that controls the access to your Amazon cloud servers. So in my case, this is the one that's attached to my FileMaker cloud server. I'm seeing that through my group name right here, FM Cloud Class. So if I select that and I go under Actions and I go to Edit Inbound Rules, these are the rules that determine what happens when somebody from the outside comes in and tries to access my resources, my network resources. Now, there's only one rule here that's not set up by default by FileMaker Cloud's installer, and that's the one for remote SSH access. That remote SSH access is something I set up because I wanted to connect to SSH to my server. These other ports are what are set up by FileMaker Cloud. So FileMaker Cloud only needs those 3 ports open in order to function, 80, 443, 5003. So I'll show you in a bit how Amazon works with preventing abuse of those ports automatically for you. But first, let's talk about this. Right now, anybody in the world can log in and SSH into my server because I have this rule here as the IP source. And when it's 0.0.0.0/0, that means that anybody can access my system. It's actually this setting under here that says anywhere puts pretty much the same CIDR code in there. So if I want to secure it so it's only my computer that can access SSH for this computer, for the server, I just need to look up my IP address, and I use an easy to remember site called ipchicken.com. And it gives me my IP address. This is the IP address that I'm currently broadcasting as my computer. Now, probably all of you are getting this same address because we're all connected to the same network to the outside. But I can copy that, pop it in there, save this, and it's going to tell me that an error occurred. because this isn't source needs to be a CIDR block or a security code. So, yep, thank you. So I had the /0 there to make it a CIDR code, and there we go. So what I've just done is I've closed the door on access to anybody else in the world that doesn't have that IP address. And that's super simple. Super simple to do. Anybody can do that. So if you want to enable, say, port 16,001 or 2, the ones that are used to access the FileMaker admin console remotely, you can add those rules in here and restrict it so that it's only for your office's IP address. And then that way, your admin console is protected from being accessed and abused by other people. Next up is talking about IAM. IAM, and not the dog food. IAM is what Amazon uses across the cloud in order to establish that level of trust, that signature of trust. So with IAM, I can manage both my account's resources, but I can also grant the permission to other Amazon users to manage accounts. And that includes like creating instances or spinning up drives or who has permission to delete things. I'm not going to give a demo about setting up an IAM user, but I am going to point out that as part of FileMaker Cloud's install process right now, you have to check a box that acknowledges that the installer is going to create IAM resources for you. And yeah, I don't really have anything set up in here. Oh, there's a couple of roles. So we're going to go back, and now we're going to look at proactive alerts. For proactive alerts, we're going to do, or actually, yeah, guard duty. I'm going to show you Shield first, because Shield's automatically included by default for. What Shield is a built-in utility for AWS that offers you protection, basic protection against DDoS attacks. It helps you automatically, without you having to do anything, prevent that. So if it senses that your network flow has suddenly increased, your network traffic has suddenly increased by 200,000%, you know, Amazon has a pretty big connection to the internet, so it can handle that many requests at the same time. But if it senses that you were only getting 5 requests before and that suddenly jumped to a huge number, it can automatically start blocking connections for you so that your server doesn't go down, and send that alert to you by email so that you know to go in and protect. So this, by default, it's included. They have a paid version that includes things like cost protection, so that if somebody comes in and starts creating a bunch of files and running up your service costs, you get refunded instead of doing that. This is actually an attack I've heard of. Somebody got their Amazon account compromised. Their Amazon username and password was compromised. And overnight, somebody racked up $10,000 in AWS charges doing Bitcoin mining by spinning up. They just went in, started spinning up instances, and started mining. And he didn't have this protection, so he had to negotiate that cost. He had to be responsible for that. So let's talk about CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is Amazon's product for monitoring and building dashboards for monitoring your AWS resources. So I've created a dashboard here called FileMaker FM Cloud. I'm going to go in there. And you'll see right now I've got network IO. And this is where I'm going to have you guys help me simulate a DDoS attack. So for those of you that have your laptops open right now, go ahead and just try to connect to fmc.filemakerdevcon2018.com. And we want to see what that does to the traffic. So there's a 5-user license of FileMaker Cloud. running up there. There's a contacts database that is unlocked with admin, no password. Just try to hammer on that for a minute here. While you're doing that, so fmc.filemakerdevcon2018.com, try to connect to that with FileMaker, try to connect to it in your browser, whatever you want to do, just try to connect to it. And we'll come back here in a little bit to see what our network monitoring looks like. In the meantime, I'm going to show you how easy it is to add another widget to this dashboard. So Amazon has this really elegant builder for this. And I'm going to do a number here. I'm going to configure that. And let's say I want EC2 metrics, per instance metrics. Here's all the metrics that I can track for my FileMaker cloud server. And I'm going to do CPU utilization. Gonna put that there. I'm going to label it CPU utilization. Enter. It's a number, create a widget. And that's going to drop that right on there. So I saw a little spike here. See how that spike's going up now? FMC for FileMaker Cloud .filemakerdevcon2018.com. But I just want to show you that this works in real time. So what's the implication of this? Well, you know, FileMaker is building this workplace innovation platform for us to integrate our own security, our own metrics dashboards. I can essentially rebuild FileMaker's admin dashboard in here in just a few minutes. And I'm talking about the one where you go and you log in and you take a look at that. So let's see if it's actually cracked out yet. You guys are doing a good job. Yep. Success. So yeah, this is a DDoS attack. It is preventing me from accessing this FileMaker Cloud dashboard because too many people are trying to access that resource at the same time. Now if I go back in here and refresh. There's a door back here behind this curtain. And I don't know if I like this computer that much that I wouldn't leave it. So you can see the CPU utilization is starting to grow. There it goes, 4.86. The network I/O is starting to grow, that type of thing. So there's hundreds of different metrics you can throw on this dashboard. And then you can bookmark this dashboard and come back to it, log in, and check on your server's health. So what FileMaker is really allowing us to do as a platform by using cloud-based services like this is it lets us build our own tools for managing things. And then one more thing I want to show you is Amazon's Guard Duty product. Yes, I want to leave that. I didn't save that dashboard, so you need to make sure you click the save button to save your changes if you want to save that widget. So what Guard Duty does is it kind of works the same way as CloudWatch does. It monitors your resources, but this goes a little deeper for you. What this does is proactive monitoring, really. And actually, I had these two reversed in terms of what's logging and what's proactive. But what you can do with Guard Duty is set up automated alerts. Let's go to, you can do things like add whitelists. You can do settings, where is it? I'm going to click this button to generate sample findings for me. But if I go back to findings now, this works similar to the Windows event viewer, where you can track and monitor alerts related to your cloud resources. So if your disk hits that 80% utilization, if your CPU reaches 95% utilization, you can use if this then that logic to set up alerts that will automatically notify you. So if I select one of these and I do actions, I can Archive, export, and unarchive. Sorry, I'm trying to remember. This is the part where I was trying to do this before. Settings. Where was it? Actually, it might be back in CloudWatch. Let me go and jump back there really quick. I'm trying to find one of the alarms for you. Yeah, it's actually under here. Sorry, that's my bad. So GuardDuty will try to give you those proactive notifications that it suspects something is wrong. So you can turn this on just by going to your AWS console. If you already have an AWS instance up and running, this is very easy to do to enable these types of services. You can go to instances, and if you go under actions, this is where you can enable that CloudWatch monitoring. So, and then under here, you can, oops, it's moving too fast. This is where you can create those alarms for if something happens. So under EC2 again, or let's go under EBS per volume, we can go under, I'm trying to find the one for, oh. I'm trying to find one that you guys will understand. It's easy to understand. Sorry. EC2, let's say CPU utilization. So let's do a CPU utilization alert right here. And then we're going to like call this, you know, like CPU alarm. Description, tell me when it hits 95%. Additional settings. So you have a couple options under here, but it will, you know, this will kick off a number of different actions throughout your AWS ecosystem, alerts to your email, labeling a device as in alarm settings so that when you're looking at a list of 20 servers, you can see that one quickly has alarm. And then you can add a notification. This is what I was looking, or send notification to select a list, enter a new list, put an email address in here, test@test.com. So send that alert and like create an alarm. Of course, I didn't save any of that. But anyways, that you can just get in and play around with to your heart's content. And that'll make, you know, for every alarm that you add, for every proactive logging that you add, you're going to have more security that you're adding on to your ecosystem. So a little bit of housekeeping, then I have apparently 30 seconds for questions. Sorry that it took so long. It must have been that vocabulary slide. Session updates, this will have updates, including a full write-up of that vocabulary. So if you memorized it all, sorry. You'll have the updates with the notes later on today. Those will be under speaker updates, or if you've bookmarked the session, session's being recorded, watch it over, spread the word. Thank you, and be secure, everyone.